I'm truly honored and privileged to be able to introduce Dr. Jerry Williams tonight. As a young physician, as Jeff mentioned, he is quite the mentor to me in terms of being a strong Christian physician, particularly in this community. I can't think of too many other physicians that have done the impact that he's had over this community in the past 20 to 25 years, and it's hard-pressed to find anyone else who's more respected, at least at the hospital, and in this medical community and stretching out into all of North Alabama. His research that he's done, I've seen the impact that it's had on a few individuals, and certainly his practice, the impact it's had. Anytime I want someone to have excellent care in a Christian way, I know where to send them, and I'm very privileged to have him here and to learn from him, and he has an excellent message for us tonight. So without further ado, Dr. Jerry Williams.
Thank you, Ryan, very much, and I'm excited too about Ryan because he's brought compassion from our young doctors, and you know, in medicine there's been a lot of stress about all the governmental changes, but it's really refreshing to see that Ryan has brought that compassion back. That I don't want us to lose that in medicine. I don't want us to get to the point where we let guidelines change how we treat people, and I appreciate Ryan, his attitude all the time, and it means a lot to me, and sure do. First of all, tonight I was trying to say, I want to tell, first of all, what I want to accomplish tonight. And first of all is that I want to answer some questions that are very important. Why are we having a heart attack every 30 seconds, even with wonderful medications and incredible procedures? Why is this? We all know wonderful people who have fallen dead with a heart attack. Some had just seen their doctor a few days ago. Why is this? We've also seen people exercise daily who look to be in perfect shape and fall dead. Why is this? We've also seen people thin as a rail who have no abdominal obesity and also are found dead in bed. Why is this? We've also seen people who look very obese and you think their heart attack waiting to happen, but they don't die. Why is this? Tonight you're going to learn the reason for this discrepancy. You're going to try to find out why are some dying and some are not. You're going to learn about metabolic syndrome, a syndrome that kills. Before you leave tonight, I want to make sure you understand that concept. And also tonight, you're going to learn what caused our obesity epidemic. You're going to learn the dangers of high fructose corn syrup, which is engineered nutrition that's killing us all. And tonight, you're going to learn that Daniel's diet can decrease your risk of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and sudden death. It can also prolong your life. And most important is that you're going to hear some things tonight you might not believe, but don't feel bad. I didn't believe it either. This new information, I said, that's not possible. I didn't believe it either, but the main thing, I pray you'll take this information and use it to help. It can actually prolong your life, your children, and your family. Next slide. Okay, we're ready to go, okay? The first thing, we'll start with a story. This started with 23 men and women who came to Cleveland Clinic hoping for a miracle. Cleveland Clinic is #1 in heart disease in the last few years, and they came to see a certain doctor there, Dr. Eselton. They were told by their family doctors from back home that you could have no more cardiac procedures, no more stents, no more surgery. You're on death's row. They were all given a death sentence and no hope for survival. They were cardiac cripples. They were taking nitroglycerin like candy. And they had chest pain with minimal activity, just doing anything. They were short of breath with minimal activity. And they were severely depressed. They came to see him hoping for a miracle. Next slide, please. This is a picture of Dr. Eselton. When I first heard about this, I didn't believe it. How could you reverse heart disease with a diet? He told these 23 people, he said, listen, he instructed them, your chance of survival depends on you doing it exactly like I say. You're on death's door. It's your only hope. They were told they had to give up fast foods, oils, meats, and dairy products. They were also told they had to get their total cholesterol below 150 and LDL below 80. Another thing, they were told you had to have an arteriogram before you start the diet and also again later. You'd have to undergo a dangerous procedure to see if the diet worked. They all signed up for that. Next slide. The results of the study to me were phenomenal in that the chest pain was much improved and most people stopped their nitroglycerin. Abnormal stress test even returned to normal, even as short as 6 weeks, which to me was impossible. All patients stopped progression of their heart disease. The blockages didn't get any worse. And many of the patients had reversal, which I couldn't believe. Reversal of heart disease with a diet. These results also occurred without an exercise program. These people weren't able to exercise. And another important thing, he's followed these people for 24 years. At this time, he's only had one person die. So that's impossible. When you have a heart attack, normally 28% of people will die in 5 years. He's had a 94% survival, which is nearly impossible. Next picture there. And the next picture is this arteriogram you'll see is that when you're looking there, this is the artery of a physician. He's a 39-year-old physician who was a surgeon at Cleveland Clinic. He came in and had crushing chest pain. He had a heart attack. You'll notice where it says distal AD, the artery was narrowed in that one location right there. It was narrowed down. They said, your artery's too small to have a stent. You can't have bypass surgery. You probably need to retire. He said, I'm 39 years old. What am I going to do? I've got family to feed. I've got bills to pay. I've got to pay my education back. He met Dr. Eselton, and here's his arteriogram 3 years later. That artery, to me, I would read that artery as normal. It's unbelievable. So when I saw this information, of course, I became very excited about it. I wanted to find out more about it. Next slide. Now, I can't figure this out. Normally, the heart looks like a horseshoe. You see how the heart's shaped like a horseshoe, turned upside down? The top picture was before treatment. Red represents blood flow. The second picture is after 6 weeks of the diet. The red is covered all the way down on the horseshoe. It's impossible when you think about it. But the stress test went back to normal with no medication changes, only a diet change. Next slide there. Now the question for all of us, why does somebody still die of a heart attack when we got all these great things that are happening? We have wonderful stents. We have bypass surgery. The problem is that heart disease is a diffuse problem. If you look at a lead pipe, it's got rust in it. It's not rusty just in the middle. It's rusty all the way through the pipe. So if somebody does a stent on you, there's other disease in the rest of the pipe. And that's where the problem is. It's a diffuse problem. And here's the one concept I want you to take home with you. It's more important than anything. Is that a heart attack usually occurs in a vessel that's only 50% blocked. It's not the 90% block. It's right opposite what you think. The reason for that is that when you have the 90% block, it's been there longer. It's calcified. It's less likely to rupture open. The one that's 50%, that plaque is real soft. It's more likely to rupture. And the next important thing to take home with you is that when you go to see your doctor, we don't have any test to tell you when that plaque is going to rupture. The stress test and arteriogram will tell you if you're at risk, but we can't tell you when the plaque is going to rupture. A normal stress test can occur with a stress test will not be abnormal unless you have over a 70% blockage. An arteriogram may show a 50% blockage, the one that's going to kill you, and your doctor say, hey, don't worry about it. You're fine. We don't need a stent. You're really not fine. You're still at a lot of risk. That's the reason people are still dying. The next most important point is that cholesterol medicines lower your risk by 40%. You're still 60% at risk. In other words, you say, I'm not going to eat right. I'm not going to follow Daniel's diet. I'm just going to take my pill. Remember, you're still at 60% at risk, and that's the reason a lot of people still die. Next slide there. Now, the next question is real important. Now, why did Dr. Eselton do so well then? If I've told you that we have a lot of problems, we're not getting the risk down to real low, why is that? Daniel's diet does something unique. It stabilizes the plaque inside your arteries. It prevents that plaque from rupturing. What a plaque is when, if you look at I like to think of it like a Velcro strip. Normally your arteries are slippery smooth. It's like glass. It just slides through there like there's no problems. What happens when you eat the wrong foods on Daniel, if you don't eat the good nutrition, real poor nutrition, what happens is the artery, the lining inside the artery becomes very sticky. It's just like a Velcro patch. So what happens is that when that fat starts coming in that artery, it sticks to that endothelium. Then what happens then, your body, in order to heal that, sends white blood cells there to fight it off. And this forms a little mass-like area called a plaque. It slowly happens. But what he did, that Dr. Eastland noticed in the study, was that you produce nitrous oxide. If you eat Daniel's diet, you produce a compound that dilates your vessels to help make that artery slippery and smooth. It prevents it from getting sticky. So when you eat right, you don't allow the lining of your vessel to become sticky so that old bad stuff's going to collect there. It's going to slide right on through. So in other words, cholesterol medicine, I'm here to tell you, are good, but without a good diet, you're still at a lot of risk. You're still at a lot of risk. Next question. Okay, good. Is Dr. Eastland's diet a new medical discovery? Not really, because Daniel told us the same thing in Daniel 1, 8 through 16. As you remember, the king told the overseer of the slaves, said, go tell Daniel and his men, I want them to be strong and healthy. I want them to have meat and wine. That's going to make them a stronger person. But if you remember what Daniel said, he said, no. He said, I want vegetables and water. So what was Daniel trying to tell us? He's trying to tell us what Dr. Eastleton is trying to say is that we don't need a lot of saturated fat. But what I thought was unique about Daniel is he's the first one to do a double-blind study. A double-blind study is when you compare one group to another group. Normally those kind of trials cost billions of dollars in the United States. He said, let's compare my men to the king's men. Let them have their meat and wine, I'll have my vegetables and water. And 10 days later, as you know, Daniel's men were stronger and healthier. And that's what happens to you on this diet, even with my own self. This diet will make you stronger and healthier. I was always afraid if you cut back on your protein, you wouldn't be strong. You will be strong. Next thing. Now here's the next most important concept that's so important. I said a while ago, obesity doesn't kill you. Only if you develop a thing called metabolic syndrome, which you're going to understand in just a few minutes. In other words, 20% of people that are massively obese are healthy. They have a normal cholesterol, normal glucose, they have no high blood pressure, no diabetes, no heart disease. 60% though have this metabolic syndrome, which we're going to describe this in a few minutes. Another thing that's important is that 60% of thin people are healthy, but 40% of thin people though have metabolic syndrome too. So we're all in this thing together. It doesn't take any survivor. It doesn't spare anybody. So no one dies of obesity alone. Obesity is a marker of risk. Nobody dies of that. You only die of obesity if you have metabolic syndrome. Since this syndrome will kill us, we have got to understand what it is. So now I want to go over with you what it means. Okay, next slide now. Okay, when John came to see me on our first visit, I said, John, you have metabolic syndrome. This is a syndrome where it's based upon high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol. And this is all in your handout, so you don't have to write it down. The good part, we have you a criteria for you. So John had high blood pressure, he had diabetes, and his waist size is above 40. So if your waist size in men is 40 or above, or women above 35, and you have 3 of the 5 risk factors, you have metabolic syndrome. And so John had the high blood pressure, diabetes, and waist size. And the other important thing about it, you'll notice, is that people that have this, the waist is usually bigger than the chest in a man. So the waist size will be bigger than in the chest. So John was at 46 inches at that time. And so he's really worked hard since then. But it's proven that he's reversed metabolic syndrome using Daniel's diet. So you say, why is that important? Why is metabolic syndrome important? The next slide is so important. If you have metabolic syndrome, you're twice as likely to die of a heart attack or stroke. And it's going to shorten your lifespan. Dr. Robert Lustig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist, he says if we don't control this in our children and all of our adults, Medicare will be bankrupt by 2026. And the reason for that is, if I said that 40% of thin people have it, and 60% of obese people have this, that's about nearly 50% of our population. So we keep going like we're going now, we're not going to be able to pay for all this. And if you look at this graph here, that you'll notice that our healthcare costs in 2011, we spent $2.7 trillion overall, but we spent $2 trillion on metabolic syndrome. That one thing alone. High blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, and a big stomach, we spent that much money completely on that. Next slide. The most important thing is that God requires us to have discipline to prevent metabolic syndrome. You know, I heard a story of a girl. She said she told her doctor said, every night I go to bed, I'm very obese. Every night I go to bed, I pray that God will wake up and I'll have a miracle, I'll be thin the next day. But she told her doctor, said, every time I wake up, I'm not thin. I'm not thin, I'm still obese. I think this is something that God wants us all to work for. We know that His prayers are important, but He's kind of He wants us to do our part. It's not going to be easy, though. You got to stay the course. It's like those people that came to see Dr. Easel. I don't want you to come to that point. We don't want to come to the point where they say you can't have stents, you can't have any more surgery. What you want to do is to start fighting right now. You can feel healthier and look better. You can age gracefully, the most important point. Next slide. This is a real important concept from Tim Ruster. Remember, he used to do the thing called Meet the Press? Tim said one thing very important. He said, I'm going to see my doctor on a regular basis. He would fly from where he was at all the way to Harvard. He would see his cardiologist every 6 months. So he was very faithful in his follow-ups. He had a normal stress test 2 months before his death. And the paper said, the headlines in Boston was, should his cardiologist be sued? That was the question. But tonight you've already learned an important concept is that we cannot predict plaque rupture, right? You could have an arteriogram, you could have a stress test. We can't tell you if that plaque is going to rupture. So what did this cardiologist do wrong? He told Tim Russert, your stress test is normal, you don't have anything to worry about. Now Dr. Easelton in Cleveland Clinic, he wouldn't have said that, would he? He said, no, your diet has to be just is more important than your medications. You're going to get a bigger reduction with your diet. And here's the answer to the problem. Look at his numbers. We said a while ago in this obesity, this metabolic syndrome, if your HDL in men is below 40 or below 50 in men, that's a risk factor. If your triglycerides are above 150, look at Tim Russert. His triglycerides were 300. Anytime your triglycerides are high, like you'll see with mine in a few minutes, you're eating bad, because that reflects your bad intake of food. You know right off the bat you're not eating well. And Tim Russert was taking his cholesterol medicine. His LDL was great, wasn't it? His LDL was 67. But you knew he had metabolic syndrome because his triglycerides were high and his HDL was low. So the only thing Tim Russert's cardiologist did was wrong in Boston. He didn't take time and said, you've got to eat right. And so I did some research on Tim Russert. I was kind of curious about what did Tim love to eat. I was shocked. He would have people fly in buffalo wings, chicken fried wings from Buffalo, New York. He would ship them in, pay that extra cost because he loved them so much. And the other thing that surprised me, he wanted organ meat. He wanted liver, which has the highest amount of cholesterol there is. So Tim Russert, he did all the right things as far as seeing his doctor, having all the blood work, taking his medicines very regular, but he didn't follow Daniel's diet. If you take one thing home tonight, please do that. Do it for your family. Do it for your children. Do it for your loved ones. The next person is Bill Clinton. There's one thing I liked about Bill Clinton when he was president. He went and hired the best economic people he could to get our economy rolling. He did a good job of that. He did a lot of bad things wrong with his health. During his presidency, he stopped his medicines. He wouldn't eat right. So he had to have bypass surgery. So there's a picture you're seeing here of him showing him eating better. He's now a patient of Dr. Easelton in Cleveland Clinic. But in 2010, Bill Clinton came in with chest pain. At Cornell University, had real bad chest pain. They admitted him and did an arteriogram. All of his bypass grafts were blocked. And so one of the media people asked the cardiologist, said, sir, is this normal for heart patients for all the bypass to be blocked? And the cardiologist said, yeah, that's fine. That's normal. We see this all the time. Well, Dean Ornish, who's a friend of Dr. Easelton, sent an email to President Clinton, and he sent Dr. Easelton's book to him. He says, Mr. President, this is not normal. It's only for fools who eat like you do. So he was trying to tell him it's what you're eating. Okay, the next picture is that, as I said, metabolic syndrome takes no survivors. It took me too. In 2008, the next picture. Look at my numbers. They were terrible. My triglycerides were 262. My HDL was 31. Total cholesterol is 205. I said if the HDL is below 40, that's bad. If the triglycerides are above 150, that's bad. Your highest risk profile, if you go to your doctor and your triglycerides are high and your HDL low, that's the highest risk for heart attack. That's what I have. And the thing is, my patients didn't know it though. The reason they didn't know it was because my waist size was 38. But I'd worked out so much that my chest size was 49. So you would never know that I had a bad stomach. Except my wife did when she was seeing me, but nobody else would know it. But the thing is that that's bad though. So you can exercise daily. You can work out really hard, but a bad diet cannot the best exercise program cannot overcome a bad diet. So recently, after when I saw Dr. Eastleton's data, I went on the Daniel's diet myself. So in 12/18/2013, my total on no medications, my total cholesterol was 124. My LDL was 75. My triglyceride was 60. My HDL was 37. The waist size was 37. So I had a 38% reduction in cholesterol. LDL reduction of 38.5%. Reduction in triglyceride of 77%. And the blood pressure dropped 34 points. Dr. Eastleton told me that would happen, but I didn't believe him. Why did I not believe him? Because we've all been taught in school, we got to do a procedure on you. We got to do this. They never told us about nutrition. And I've told people this story before. My first day as a fellow in Tennessee, I was becoming a lung specialist. They flew a helicopter in, and this poor guy had been burned bad. You know how it's when your first day on the job, you're scared to death anyway. And I asked the professor, I said, now why are we using so much protein, carbohydrates? He said, Jerry, that's not important. Your job is learn how to put a bronchoscope in somebody's lungs. Don't you worry about the nutrition. The dietitian will take care of that. So that's the way in medicine we approach nutrition. Next slide there. But God said it right, though, is that Proverbs 23:2, put a knife to your throat if you're given to gluttony. I was killing myself with a spoon and fork. We're all in this together. I was killing myself with a spoon and fork. I had metabolic syndrome. I was twice as likely to die with a heart attack or stroke. And I'm supposed to set an example. I'm supposed to tell my patients what to do, and I was eating terrible. But I needed God's help to control my addiction. I did have an addiction. There's no question about it. I always have had addiction for food. And you'll get one of the handouts today will talk about, a poem I've written about obesity. How I would get on the scales every day, praying it'd be better. But I didn't want to eat right though. Next slide there. So why are we getting fatter and sicker? Our question. We've got all these great shows, The Biggest Loser. The Biggest Loser works for a while. I was watching it one time. This poor boy weighed 340 pounds. They worked him so hard he vomited. He lost weight dramatically, but the studies on the follow-up of The Biggest Loser, 99% gained all their weight back. That's real sad. So all diets work for 3 to 6 months and then fail. In other words, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm losing weight on this diet, all diets work for 3 to 6 months because you're calorie restricting yourself. But remember, Dr. Eastleton's diet is the only one that did an arteriogram. That's what's important. That's what you want to carry home. Somebody says, I've got a program for you. Yeah, I don't know of any programs where they did an arteriogram before and after and followed these people for 24 years. It doesn't exist. That's the reason this study is so impressive. Why does eating less fail? If you cut back on your calories on any diet, your body doesn't like that. Next slide, please. And when you cut back your calories, just look what's happening on this slide. First on the thyroid, your thyroid shuts down. Your thyroid doesn't produce thyroid hormone, so you start gaining more weight. Then the stress of that stimulates your adrenal cortex, which produces cortisol. Cortisol stimulates insulin. Insulin is that hormone that God gave us to store fat, so it makes you store more fat. Then also it shuts down your reproductive system. Then all you do then is increase your food intake. So calorie restriction is not the answer. On Daniel's diet, you eat till you're full. You don't calorie restrict. So God created us to overeat and store fat. Storing fat is a way to survive when you have limited food supply. Our ancestors had to hunt their food down. You may not get food for a while, so that's the reason God created insulin. Insulin is the only hormone you have in the body that stores fat. God only made one. We have 100,000 hormones, but only one stores fat. Next slide there. And what's interesting, He's wired us to want to eat sugar, fat, and salt. The reason is you've got to survive. You're going to get the most calories the quickest if you eat sugar, salt, and fat. Next slide, please. So why does exercising more fail? Exercise is not good for weight loss. If you eat a cheeseburger with fries, you have to jog 10 miles. Who wants to jog 10 miles to have a cheeseburger and fries? If you to burn a pound of fat, I did a calculation, you've got to do 250,000 crunches. Who wants to do 250,000 crunches? So exercise cannot make up for a bad diet. Next slide, please. This slide's real important. And when I went back to do the research, sometimes things are passed on. I was wrong on this. I'm glad I did this research. Is that what foods are making us have this metabolic syndrome? What's put us here? And I thought that steaks were going to be high on the list. The consumption of steaks has went down. But what has went up is our consumption of chicken, which is a fast food. So you look at this graph here, 97% of our increase since 1982 to now has been with fast foods, processed foods, and sugar. That's what's caused the metabolic syndrome. Our consumption of Daniel's diet of fruits and vegetables only went up 1%. In fruits and vegetables, they're natural antioxidants, natural cancer fighters. We didn't increase those. We increased our consumption of fatty foods and stuff. Next slide. The most important thing that today to take home with you, though, is this right here. This is real critical. Metabolic syndrome starts in your liver. You don't know you have it. Because remember, the important thing is when you pinch an inch, that's not what kills you. The subcutaneous tissue doesn't kill you. You know, earlier we talked about those wrestlers. We talked about that those people eat all the time. They don't have any metabolic syndrome until they quit wrestling. A football player that plays in the NFL, he does well until he stops playing football. Then he starts getting a metabolic syndrome. But the important thing is this disease starts in your liver. You will not know you have it unless you have a liver test that shows your enzymes are elevated, or you have an ultrasound that shows it. It's silently killing you. So what happens is the fat invades the liver. It sets up an inflammation. We talked about a while ago when those white blood cells go to the liver to fight off that fat that's there. It starts scarring your liver. The scarring gets worse, and that leads to cirrhosis, a terrible disease where you get ascites, swelling, and feeling terrible. So remember the key is that metabolic syndrome starts in your liver. The next slide. When you look at this slide here, you say, well, all these arrows go and everything, but there's one important concept to take home. It's about insulin. Metabolic syndrome is due to insulin, where you get insulin resistant. It's all due to that. So in other words, if somebody takes fat in their liver, I increase my amount of insulin to take care of that. That increased amount of insulin stiffens the vessels of my arteries, and that causes me to have high blood pressure. The increased insulin stores more fat and produces more cholesterol, LDL and HDL. So if I get stiff vessels plus the bad cholesterol, then I get heart attacks. Also, when that fat's there, your pancreas has to work overtime. It has to keep producing more and more insulin to finally your pancreas fails and you get diabetes. Also, the increased insulin is rapidly firing more and more. It stores more fat and you get obesity. Then the sad part is that when you think about increased fat intake and insulin is like putting kerosene on the cancer. Insulin makes the cancer go wild. So in other words, there's no question that breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer are strongly correlated with increased saturated fat intake. So you want to cut back on that. But insulin is the driver. Insulin is the driver that's causing it. 10% of females have polycystic ovarian syndrome that cannot get pregnant or have a cyst on their ovaries. That's all due to, and insulin's driving that. So remember that elevated insulin levels are the cause of metabolic syndrome. Okay, next slide, please. In my first two books, I coined the term white powder. And what I was talking about, the white powder addiction was sugar, flour, heroin, and cocaine. The four dangerous white powders. I felt they were all the same. And why would I feel they're the same as far as what it does to us? What it does to us, it creates an opiate-like effect. It increases serotonin. When you have a donut here, your serotonin levels go sky high. It makes you feel good. If you're a crack cocaine addict, you want more and more of that crack. You've got to have more, and they'll spend every dime they got to get it. How many of us have just had one donut? What do? We want that second donut, don't we? So strong addiction. Next slide there. Next is don't leave here today without understanding about high fructose corn syrup. I'm real embarrassed that I've never told anybody about this. All this information, I'm having to change my website because what I told you in my other two books were wrong. So I'm going back and starting over again myself at 25 years saying, well, I was wrong before. But in medicine, sometimes there's critical information that's suppressed. But I want you to understand what high fructose corn syrup is. High fructose corn syrup is in 80% of our foods. And what it is that a Japanese guy discovered it. It was introduced in our food system in 1979. Our obesity epidemic was stayed at 15% in 1960, 1970, but 1980 it started rising. And since then it's doubled. So high fructose corn syrup is definitely a contributing factor to our obesity epidemic. And what's unique about high fructose corn syrup is that, unlike glucose, your body, here's something I always remember. When we talk about glucose in your body doesn't need you to take sugar in. Your body produces glucose by a biochemical process called gluconeogenesis. It produces all the sugar you need. But glucose is the energy of life. Your brain cannot live without glucose. If you've ever seen somebody get in a diabetic coma and their blood sugar goes to 30, you got to wake them up, you got to give them some sugar. They're in a coma. You can't do without glucose. But what's unique about glucose, though, only 20% of it goes to your liver. And the other 80% is converted into glycogen, which is this compound that runners want to use when they're running real hard. The glycogen is real important. So what's important about, though, with high fructose corn syrup, it doesn't produce any glycogen. It all goes to your liver and makes you have a fatty liver, which starts that dreaded curse of metabolic syndrome that's killing all of us. So why would the food industry want this substance? Well, it makes it taste 20% sweeter. It makes it wonderful. You want it even more. And it's real cheap. They can make billions of dollars of more income because it's so cheap to produce this in a test tube. This is engineered test tube sugar. Next slide there. Here's the scary part for me is this slide here is that this really bothers me, y'all. And I feel so bad I didn't know more about this. And they suppress this information, as you know, because 7 of the 12 people that wrote our guidelines for nutrition were making money from the food industry. How come they haven't told us about high fructose corn syrup? This slide is really detrimental for all of us. If we compare alcohol to high fructose corn syrup, they both cause hypertension. They both cause heart disease. They both cause high cholesterol. They both cause pancreatitis. They both cause obesity. They both cause hepatic dysfunction. They both are addictive, and they both kill. To me, that's so sad that we don't know that, and for our children's sake. The next slide is real sad for me too, because I'm seeing this more and more often. This guy's bragging about his beer belly. It's nothing to brag about, because alcohol causes fatty liver. We talked about earlier, right? But high fructose corn syrup does too. So Dr. Robert Lustig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist, he's labeled soda belly in our children. He's right. Our children are getting a big belly from this metabolic syndrome. This liver fat's invading their livers, and we don't know it. It's slowly going to be killing them. They're going to be diabetic. They're going to have hypertension and all these terrible things. So we didn't know about this. So I want to go through this real quickly. All right. When I was a kid growing up, I loved Pop-Tarts. Anybody love that? Guess what it's got in it? High fructose corn syrup. It's getting your liver. Applesauce. Apples are good for you. God gives you. When somebody processes it and turns it into applesauce, it has high fructose corn syrup. So you want to make sure you look at the ingredients list on it. It's high fructose corn syrup. Anybody not like macaroni and cheese? What kid doesn't like macaroni and cheese? Guess what it's got in it? Corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup. Not every one of them does. You've got to look at the ingredients list. Not every one of them has it. You've got to check your ingredients. What about A1 steak sauce? You think your steak may be a lot healthier, but it's got high fructose corn syrup. Barbecue sauce has high fructose corn syrup. Italian dressing, that's very disappointing, has high fructose corn syrup. I used to love Aunt Jemima. It says here, it tells you the good news. Guess what? It's 50% less calories. It's the light version. Guess what, though? It's got high fructose corn syrup. It's going to kill your liver, but you're getting less calories. This right here bothers me a lot. Because, some children don't like to drink milk. Chocolate milk has high fructose corn syrup in it. This one I bought today has high fructose corn syrup. That's real sad. What about we're going to have a bunch of kids over to see us, It's always nice to, you feel safer when your kids come to your house. Let's make some pizza, right? Bagel bites. Why would they put high fructose corn syrup in bagel bites? It makes it taste better. It makes it irresistible. What about Capri Sun? My daughters used to love this. Anybody ever tried that? It's got high fructose corn syrup in it. What about Heinz, my favorite ketchup? It's got high fructose corn syrup in it. But there are a lot of ketchup that you can get that doesn't. You just got to look at the ingredient. Everybody loves, I remember when kids are acting up in church, you give them a vanilla wafer, right? This has high fructose corn syrup in it. I looked it up. What about a graham cracker? We all want to be good parents, give them graham crackers. It has high fructose corn syrup in it, which will kill your liver. And then oatmeal cookies. They say, have something healthy. Have you an oatmeal cookie. Oatmeal is good for us, right? Oatmeal is really good. It lowers cholesterol. But this has high fructose corn syrup. Oreo cookies have been around for 100 years. They have high fructose corn syrup. What about we go and get everybody to have a hot dog? Hot dog buns have high fructose corn syrup. Hamburger buns have high fructose corn syrup. Bread, good old the picture of the girl on the bread has high fructose corn syrup. Whole wheat bread doesn't, though. There are a lot of breads who don't have this. You have to get the right one. Okay, the next thing is on soda calories. If your child takes in 1 soda a day, you increase their risk of diabetes. A 12-ounce Coke, so a 12-ounce Coke, that's 10 teaspoons of sugar, but what else does it have? It has high fructose corn syrup. So you're getting a double whammy. You're getting your liver and you're getting sugar too. What about when you go to a 20-ounce? You get 20 teaspoons of sugar. Then when you go to the 32-ounce, you get 30 teaspoons of sugar. But what's more important, though, is the weight gain, right? If you take that amount of calories times 365 days divided by 3,500 calories per get a pound, you'll notice that the 12-ounce drink will gain 15 pounds, the 20-ounce you'll gain 25 pounds, and the 30-ounce you'll gain 41 pounds each year, just from that alone. Next slide. What about fruit juices? The rule you got to remember is always eat your fruit. Do not drink the fruit. Because most of these fruits are full of, I left that one at home, but if you look on your thing, Minute Maid orange juice, you'll see it's about half the calories of sugar. Look at the weight gain you get, 11-pound gain, weight gain, you get a 22-pound weight gain. So in other words, always eat your fruit, don't drink it, and never juice something. Don't juice anything because in a few minutes you're going to learn why that's so important. Don't juice it. It takes the fiber out. You don't want to remove the fiber. Next thing is on Gatorade. This thing about Gatorade. Y'all remember when Gatorade was invented? University of Florida? It tasted awful. What did Pepsi-Cola do? They got a hold of it. What did they put in it? High fructose corn syrup. Look at your third ingredient there. Third ingredient, glucose fructose syrup. They worded different ways to fool you, see? So in other words, athletes don't drink this. Children drink this. The good athletes know it's sugar water. That's the thing to remember. All right, next slide. Why do we want sugar so bad? Because really God, programmed us to want sugar. In nature, poisons are bitter, so you want to taste something sweet. Breast milk is our first taste of sugar. That's where we're attracted to sugar. Sugar has an opiate effect. In the hospital, children are given this sweet ease that ease the pain when they have a circumcision. It's very relaxing. Prevents you from having severe pain. Next slide. So tonight, I tell you, the only time sugar is good for, if you get a gunshot wound in the chest, if you put sugar inside the wound, it stops the bacteria from growing. That's the only time you really need to consider a lot of sugar is that a gunshot wound in the chest, you can put you put it in there. But see, the reason the food industry likes this is that sugar prevents the bacteria. Like a commercial bread, this bread it'll take 3 weeks before it molds. Where bread in the bakery is going to go away real fast, So remember that sugar it helps to prolong the bacteria from breaking down the food. Now the next thing is the browning reaction, real important, is that if you take a sugar and you cook it with fat and protein, you create a compound called advanced glycation end products, AGE. That's what counts for all of our aging. It causes heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, neuropathy, hypertension, strokes. The reason the food industry does it gives it a pretty color. A donut wouldn't be as attractive as white looking. is that brown color attracts you. It makes it a great smell too. It gives a great aroma. But guess what? It's making your body rust. These AGE reactions, what it does, it slowly makes your body rust like that pipe. That's found in donuts, barbecue meat, and also I went by and got a French fry this morning. So French fries normally are white, it's got a brownish color. That's due to that aging reaction that's slowly killing you. Now the next thing is real important. We're going to speed up a little bit here. Fiber is that I termed the coin that fiber was God's antidote for insulin. The reason I felt it was an antidote, think about that. Why would God give us insulin that makes us store fat that's going to kill us without having an antidote? He's too smart for that. He gave us fiber. When you eat fruit, and the whole fruit is not being processed, it has fiber, because fruit has fructose in it, right? It prevents that from elevating your insulin levels. When you get in trouble, when you take Minute Maid orange juice, take all the fiber out, and your insulin level goes sky high. So eat the fruit. So fiber is found in fruit, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Next slide there. The health benefits of fiber is real important. Fiber acts like a sponge. It takes your cholesterol, soaks it up, and pulls it out of your body. A high fiber diet can lower your risk of heart disease by 40%. Fiber slows the absorption of carbohydrates, lowers blood sugar. It makes you feel full. Now, you have less weight gain eating a lot of fiber. But here's the important thing. Fiber is not found in meat. It's not found in cheese. It's not found in dairy. It's not found in eggs, oils, refined grain products, and it's not found in Cokes. So in other words, when you eat those products without the fiber, you have no protection from the insulin. So it's important next to know what the criteria for a whole grain food is. It's important to look at the symbol there is that the whole grain, if it says whole grain, the first degree, that's a good product. And also look at the carbohydrate fiber ratio. If you have, say, 20 carbs in a product, and say it has 5 grams of fiber, so 20 divided by 5 is 4. If it's less than 10, that's a good fiber ratio. Next slide. So fast food is fiberless food. So why would they take the fiber out of food? Because it lasts a long time. You remove the fiber, it increases the profits for the companies. They can ship it overseas. When you remove the fiber, you cause high insulin levels, obesity, and metabolic syndrome. And also you take away God's natural antidote. Okay, the next thing is on saturated fat. Let's bring the next slide. This is real important. Is that I used to think that maybe our saturated fat was due to too much steaks. The number 1 and 2 causes of saturated fat that's killing us is pizza and cheese. 1 slice of cheese has 5 grams of saturated fat. So pizza and cheese are our biggest source. So fast food makes up the top portion of this list. Refined grain desserts, chicken, hot dogs, ribs, burgers, and Mexican fast food makes up that list. Now, what about milk? You know, if you look at milk, 2% milk has 5 grams of saturated fat, 1% has 2 grams of saturated fat. But what they trick you here is that it's on here, you look at this, it says daily value. It says 12% fat. Well, you say, hey, that's great, that's only 12%. They tricked you. That represents the whole day. So the total fat here is 8 grams. You've got to multiply that by 9, that equals 72 calories. So 72 calories out of 150 are due to fat. So half those calories are from fat. See how they trick you? It says percent DV, daily value, is low, but they trick you. And so you've got to be very careful with milk. So if you're going to drink milk, use skim milk if it doesn't have any saturated fat. Okay, the next slide there, please. We're nearly just about got here. All right, trans fats. Somebody many years ago said, we're going to take butter. We're going to make it into something better. What they made it into was the heart attack fat. If you take butter and you heat it to a high temperature and you infuse hydrogen ions into that compound, you create a trans fat, which is what we call the heart attack fat. It lowers your HDL and increases your LDL. And one thing I want you to take home today is very important. How do we pick this up? Right now, some packages will not say that they have trans fats. So I did some research for fun today. Anybody like these fruit roll-ups for kids? It says it's all fruit. It says the word partially hydrogenated oil. If you see partially hydrogenated oil, that's a trans fat. They're tricking you. But you say, why don't it say trans fat on the outside? The government allowed them, if it's 0.5 grams or less, not to put that on the container. How could they do that? Because we need to know if that's a trans fat, right? It's the only way you're going to tell. You've got to go to the ingredients list and look for where it says partially hydrogenated oil. You've got to remember that. That is critical. I'll be glad to help y'all learn to read labels, but you've got to learn to read labels because these people are tricking you. Remember, the people that wrote our guidelines, 7 of the 12, are paid off on the table. They're not going to tell. They're not going to say it's a trans fat. You've got to read the ingredients. Well, I used to love these Grand biscuits. You ever like those? Have them swell up a lot? Guess what it's got? Partially hydrogenated oils, which is trans fats. It doesn't say trans fat on the outside, does it? Because they do that. And why would they put partially hydrogenated oils in Fruit Loops? All kids love Fruit Loops. So make sure when you get your cereals, you look to make sure it's not that. And last but not least, please forgive me for making a mistake about yogurt. In my last book, I talked about yogurt was great. Eat all the yogurt you want. It's going to University of Tennessee published a study that lowered abdominal fat. We found out later that study was flawed. They didn't tell the truth. It was actually done, I didn't know it, by a food producer. So they flawed their results. I want you to look at this. Yoplait yogurt is supposed to be pretty healthy, right? All right, look here. It says there's total carbohydrates is only 11%. Sugar is 11%. That's the daily value. It says there's 25 grams of sugar. You've got to multiply 25 times 4 to get the number of calories. So 100 of the 170 calories is pure sugar. That's a dessert. So don't eat a lot of yogurt. It's going to make you gain weight in your stomach. So you will not know that unless you do the calculation in your head. So if you get up an ingredients list, if you find sugar in the first 3 ingredients of any ingredients list, that is a dessert. That's not a nutritious food. Okay, that's now we're nearly through, y'all. Been very patient with me. The last thing is this on omega-3 and omega-6s. Now, Dr. Easelton, he doesn't, in people that are on death's door, he'll tell them not to use any protein, but I still eat fish because of this fact right here, is that fish, especially, walnuts, flax seeds, I eat a lot of fish, I eat grilled and baked because it produces omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids, they decrease that inflammation. Remember I talked about when you get the inflammation inside the vessel, they actually decrease that. Now, omega-6 fatty acids, they're not the same thing. They're found in sunflower oil, safflower, soybeans. They increase inflammation. They account for metabolic syndrome, bowel disease, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis. And the most important thing about omega-6 is that omega-6 is that they're produced in animals that are fed with grain. So if you put a cow in a feedlot, you don't put it out in a pasture where there's grass, and you just feed them grain, they grow up, they get fat quickly. Those have a high amount of omega-6 that increase inflammation that's going to give you heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure. Range-fed animals, a range-fed chicken where it's not, and a range-fed cow, that's not true, but it's so expensive to buy range food, it's very high. I wish they would make those standards better for all of us, but it's important to remember that you increase that omega-6, it increases the inflammation in your body. Here's the last thing, we'll be through. Appreciate y'all's patience. I know it's a long thing. This is important too, is that the new theory on exercise is that, remember I said you don't exactly have to exercise on Daniel's diet. You can do very well there, but if you add exercise to it, that helps lower insulin levels also. The new research is a new technique called high-intensity interval training. It's nicknamed HIIT. What that means is that if you normally, when you exercise, in order to burn fat, you had to exercise for 20 to 30 minutes before your body would begin burning fat. With this HIIT regimen, you start burning fat within 4 to 5 minutes. It's very powerful. And the way you do that, you do intervals. You exercise hard for 20 seconds and you rest for 10 seconds. You go back and forth. Like if you're walking, you walk fast for 20 seconds and you slow down and walk slow for 10 seconds. You can do that with any type of weight training. So John Blackwell can actually help you show that, or Dale Hayes can show you how we do that a lot. And then in closing, I kind of wanted to have a prayer first before I say the last few words about, and we'll have prayer, then we'll say a few words then. And Father, even in our darkest hour, we know your love is filling our hearts, and so help us not to forget that you are our fortress and deliverer that can calm the worst storms in our life. Father, help us not to forget that you have the power to turn darkness into light. Father, as we face this metabolic syndrome, please help us to not give up the fight when the desires for food want to consume us. Father, help us to have discipline and follow Daniel's diet to improve our health and well-being. Father, help us to teach our children the dangers of high fructose corn syrup and to be example to them in the way we eat. Father, help us to realize we have only today and we're not promised tomorrow. Help us to realize that with each passing minute, we're getting closer to eternity. Father, help us to stay on the Christian course and let Jesus be our guide to our final destination. In His name we pray. Amen. If there's someone tonight that's battling with this obesity, this addiction is so strong. There's nothing wrong with asking God to help you with it. And the thing I want to send home with you learn tonight is that, don't depend completely on your doctor. You've got to get involved in Daniel's diet to lower your risk. It can save your life. But most of all, do this for your children, for your grandchildren, people that love you. Don't let it destroy you. But God can help you tonight if you have that addiction. He can help you give it up. He can help turn your life around in this. Believe me, we've all been there. You saw I've been there. Everybody's been there. It takes no survivor, this disease doesn't. It's affecting us all. So would we please stand if anybody...
A while ago, not juicing fruit. Could you elaborate there a little bit more quickly?
Yeah, what that's about is that the data from Cleveland Clinic is that a lot of people have said that with cancers they were doing a lot of juicing and stuff like that, but they found out you kept more of the antioxidants and natural cancer fighters when you didn't juice because it didn't affect the fiber. And the reason for it is that when you any type of juicing removes some fiber, it may not remove all of it, but when you take the fiber out, remember fiber is the antidote for insulin. So if the fiber is removed, your insulin levels go higher, and the high insulin levels drive this metabolic syndrome. They create all the diseases. So you want to make sure don't juice anything, just eat the fruit. So when you send your kids to school, cut them an apple up, give them some peanut butter with it, something like that, put in there, rather than give them a lot of the Capri Sun and stuff like that, Good question.
Tell me the pro on coffee and tea.
Coffee and tea is that, I think that's okay as long as you don't add the sugar to it, One thing you got to remember, I didn't know this, but I didn't mention it a while ago. The creamer here has partially hydrogenated oils. It has trans fats in it. I didn't know the creamers had trans fats, so be very careful adding the creamer, So, try not to add a lot of sugar to the coffee or tea. And good question, though.
Dr. Williams, how about artificial sweeteners?
Yeah, yes, I still think that artificial sweeteners, like stevia and Splenda, are still safer than the high fructose corn syrup and the other things, but you got to use it in kind of moderation. That's a very good question. Do y'all like chocolate drop cookies? My recipe that I have for chocolate drop cookies is that we take almond milk and instead of using butter, we use applesauce, and we use Splenda in that, and we use the peanut butter and of course oats. In that case, it gives you dessert with no saturated fat. She was very good about honey. I would definitely have honey before I'd have anything that had high fructose corn syrup in it, because it's what God gave us. And try to think if it's God given us to us. But not the only thing to remember about honey, it's got calories. You don't eat too much of it, But it's still better than having the high fructose corn syrup and all that. One thing I want to make a point too is that when you get your syrup, my wife has a great recipe for whole wheat pancake. It is awesome. It uses whole wheat flour. It uses oatmeal, which lowers cholesterol. Now, what I put on top of that is maple syrup. And when you look at the bottle of maple syrup, it only has one ingredient. It says maple syrup. Anytime you get on an ingredient list, it has one ingredient, or less than five or less, that's a great product. When you look on the ingredient, it's got 20 or 30 things, that's very processed. So if you're going to don't get the Aunt Jemima, which the one I used to like, it says there's 50% less calories. That has high fructose corn syrup. Get maple syrup, and that's what Dr. Eselton at Cleveland Clinic used in his page. They use maple syrup, which I think is a great item. When you get the bottle, it just says maple syrup on it, so it's not less processed. Good question. Yeah. Yeah, potatoes is. I'm glad you asked that question because in class one day I said that carbohydrates do not make you fat, but let me qualify that. What I meant by that is that God-given carbohydrates do not make you fat. And there's a website of a guy in Idaho who grows potatoes. He was eating 25. John, how many potatoes was it a day? Was it 25 or 30? I was trying to remember. And his cholesterol numbers came out real good because the potato, when you eat it by itself, it's not been fried or something. It has not have sour cream and butter on it. it actually is a good thing. So in other words, the potato that God gave you is okay. Just don't put butter and sour cream on it. You know, that's where you get in trouble. So leave out the butter and sour cream. Good question, though. All right.
Does it still hold true that when you look at ingredients, they're listed in the order of what is the greatest amount in there?
That's very true. That's a good point. So if whole grain is listed first, you know that's a very good whole grain product. It's listed first. If whole grain's way down the middle, it's probably got less than 10% whole grain. So Mike has got a good point. You want to definitely pick out something. And remember, the other rule is if you have a sugar that's in the first three ingredients, that's really a dessert. So if that includes xyltose, maltose, anything that ends in OSC. OSC stands for sugar. So if you see anything that ends in that, that means that's a sugar, and don't try not to eat that. That's a good question.
What about salt?
Yeah, salt's important in the fact that where we get in trouble with people with high blood pressure like me is that salt, we want to limit our salt intake. What you want to do, you can cook with salt, but don't re-salt it when it gets to the table. And what I try to do, I'll try to use a little pepper or something else, and because you're only supposed to have 1 teaspoon of salt a day. That's not very much. That's 2,400 milligrams. So in other words, just try not to add salt to it. But a little bit of salt when you're cooking is okay, though. Yeah. Good question. If you have chronic kidney disease, there was a case recently. If your doctor tells you have chronic kidney disease, there's a man in Florence who they put the shunt in his arm. In other words, they're starting dialysis. His GFR was down to 14. He stopped all of his protein intake, and now it's been 5 years. He's not on dialysis. So there's definitely, people tell you when you start having kidney disease, cut your protein out. So that's something to remember. Cut back on your amount of protein. You know, we don't need tons of protein like we think we did. You know.
You didn't talk about ice cream, so that means I can go home and have ice cream.
You know what? I'm so glad you mentioned that. Does anybody like Bluebell homemade ice cream, the vanilla? Guess what it has in it, y'all? I was so sick about that. It has high fructose corn syrup. I was really disappointed about that because that Bluebell vanilla, you know, and Chick-fil-A has always been an intervention for new products, and just like McDonald's had tried to innovate, but he took all his high fructose corn syrup out of all his buns and all his muffins. So that guy at Chick-fil-A, not only does he try to live a Christian life, he tries to be a lot nutritious for the fact. Remember, he doesn't open on Sundays. He teaches his Sunday school class, but he also took out high fructose corn syrup. He didn't let that bottom line of profit take over because he's going to make a lot more money keeping high fructose corn syrup in there. It's going to be more. He'll have less expense, but he knew that he didn't want to hurt anybody, so he took that out. So I'm proud of him for doing that. Okay. They're in the back there. That recipes is very important because if the food don't taste good, you don't do it. You ought to taste her vegetarian chili. It is awesome. And the vegetarian lasagna she had is great. The whole wheat pancakes are awesome, you know. She even has a blueberry cobbler made this way. And while I go and get a chance to tell you a little more about the chocolate drop cookies, you can change that recipe, see. What we use for that is almond milk. Almond milk has no saturated fat and it tastes pretty good. So you swap from regular milk for almond milk. For butter, we use applesauce. If we don't use applesauce that's got high fructose corn syrup, you got to read the ingredients. There's applesauce that doesn't have that like this one does. This one says Food Club Original, so you've got to find the one that's healthier, you know. But that you can use that in place of butter. Also, you can use in place of butter is yogurt. Plain yogurt without any sugar added can replace butter also in a food item you're cooking. It can be very good like that. Yeah, that's a very good question. Let me comment on that a little bit because when it says sugar-free, that means they've substituted something else in there with it. So what they'll do a lot of times, they'll put a lot of compounds like maltose. It gives you diarrhea. It's a sugar alcohol. And you ever notice that? I was disappointed in a lot of the sugar-free things. They go ahead and they'll swap. They'll put that sugar alcohol in there and other things. You have to be careful. Sometimes I used to get a little nauseated with it because it makes you have some diarrhea. So when it says sugar-free, a lot of times they'll substitute some of those sugar alcohols and some of these other things. It'll say maltose or xanose or something like that. So you have to be careful with those, you know. So the answer to your question too, if you can fix it yourself, Like my wife's veggie burgers. If you go get a Morningstar veggie burger, it's got a list of 50 things. She's only got a few ingredients. You know what those ingredients are, and it's really, you got to taste her veggie burger. It tastes awesome. It's made with black beans, and it's real spicy. It's got carrots in it. It's got onions. You have to get. She's got the recipe there. So in other words, if you make it yourself, you don't get caught up in that, all that processing problem.
How about venison?
What now?
Venison?
Yeah, venison is low in and actually venison is low in saturated fat compared to other things. So in other words, that's a good example where the omega-6 would be low, right? Because venison, they're eating normal grass, they're running around the woods, so they would be a good choice to eat because they would have low omega-6 levels. And that would decrease your inflammation. When you put an animal in a feedlot and only give it grain, it's when you have a lot of problems. So venison will be good. Buffalo's only 3% saturated fat. We don't have buffalo around here, but it's really, really low, you know. Good question.
If Mr. Cadney make his corn syrup out of his ice cream?
That's a good question. His ice cream is awesome. Anybody ever had that ice cream? I love his ice cream there, but he's taken it out of everything. I don't know if it's done it. I know that's what he said in his a note to everybody. He's going to take it out of everything. Okay, back there. That's a very good question. And our book is coming out, and we have a book coming out, and we already finished. My wife's doing the references right now. We're going to try to get this book to be free online, and John's working on some things, trying to get some people to sponsor it for people who don't have computers. So it's got in that book, it talks about that if you're on Daniel's diet, you need to have vitamin B12. You know why you have to do that? That's a great question. Is that our soil used to have plenty of vitamin B12 in it. But what's happened now, the fertilizer, the effects on our soil, reutilization, we've lost the B12. Because B12 is produced by bacteria. So now the only way you can get B12 is in meat where it gets, because there's more contaminated bacteria in meat, so therefore you get more production of vitamin B12. That's how that actually works. But you do have to have vitamin B12, you have to have calcium, and he recommends a multivitamin if you're actually not taking a lot of protein in. So a multivitamin, vitamin B12 is a calcium supplementation. It's what Dr. Eastleton recommends in his book, and that's what I also put in my book, you know. The only difference in my book and Dr. Eastleton, I talked a lot about our obesity epidemic while we got there, and about this high fructose corn syrup thing. He didn't really talk a lot about that in his book, but I did a lot, and why we got obese, you know. Okay. Yeah.
Jerry, many years ago, when Frank had his heart attack, you were a big proponent of Kashi cereal. Are you still?
Yes, and that's a good question. There's 5 cereals that's in the book that are good. My problem was I used to love the honey roasted cereal. Guess what? That's got too much sugar in it. The one you want to get is the plain Cheerios. It's got less than 5 grams of sugar. That's a good one to use for a cereal. Kashi is a very good one. The Kashi materials are good. They have a lot of high fiber, you know. So Kashi is a good one too. Fiber One's a good one. There's 5 listed in the book, I think, but Cheerios is really good. It's easy for kids to get, so that's a good choice. And the Kashis are still good. That's a good question there.
One more question.
Yeah.
One more question. If we have one more.
Okay. Okay.
But then also let them know that we'll have a link on our website to your book too.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. You can go to the book there too, and that'll be really good. And we should have that ready soon. You can read through that, and if you have any questions. The main thing is finding stuff that you like and that you can cook doing this. And Dr. Eastleton's book has a lot of recipes too. But if you go to nutritionmd.com, they've got a lot of recipes on there too. And just take some recipe you like and just modify. You don't have to be perfect on this. If you just make some minor changes, you can still make your life a lot healthier, you know. Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank y'all for coming.